There are moments in life when change doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives like a conversation, like a calm presence, like someone who listens without interrupting, who sees without judging, who speaks without trying to own. Sometimes that someone is you. There are people walking around today, who had already made peace with a small life, not because they lacked talent, not because they lacked dreams, but because they were standing under the shadow of someone who controlled their choices, their voice, their confidence, and slowly their identity. Control rarely introduces itself loudly. It whispers. It negotiates. It says, "This is for your own good." And over time, the person being controlled stops asking questions, stops choosing freely, stops imagining more. They begin to settle. Settle for permission instead of partnership. Settle for approval instead of respect. Settle for survival instead of joy. And then they met you. Not a superhero, not a savior, just a human being who showed them something different. You asked what they thought. You waited for their answer. You respected their no. You celebrated their yes. You disagreed without punishment. You cared without conditions. And without announcing it, you introduced them to emotional freedom. You see, transformation doesn't always come from grand speeches. Often, it comes from healthy contrast. When someone experiences honesty after manipulation, support after pressure, space after suffocation, clarity is born. Your role was not to pull them out. Your role was to remind them they could walk. And let's be clear about something important. Empowering someone is not about making them dependent on you instead. It's about helping them become more dependent on themselves. Real support does not replace one controller with another. It restores choice. When you told them you're allowed to decide, something unlocked. When you said, "That doesn't sound right. How do you feel about it?" Something woke up. When you treated them like an equal, something healed. Never underestimate the power of being treated with dignity, especially by someone who hasn't felt it in a long time. Some people will never know how close they were to disappearing inside a controlled life. Because one conversation, one friendship, one moment of being truly seen change their direction. That is impact, not loud, not flashy, but life-altering. So if you ever wonder whether your kindness matters, whether your honesty matters, whether your presence matters, remember this. Someone was preparing to accept less until your example showed them more. Someone was shrinking until your respect gave them room. Someone was settling until your truth gave them courage. Keep being the safe place. Keep being the mirror that shows people who they are, not who they're told to be. Because sometimes the turning point in a person's story is not a dramatic escape. Sometimes it's simply meeting you. Sometimes courage does not begin inside a person. It is first reflected back to them through someone else's presence, tone, and patience. Many people living under control are not weak, not incapable, not broken. They are simply unheard for too long. When a person's opinions are dismissed repeatedly, when their choices are corrected constantly, when their feelings are minimized daily, they slowly disconnect from their own inner voice. They begin to doubt their judgment, their perception, and even their right to speak. Then someone enters their life who listens fully, pauses before responding, asks instead of orders, and respects instead of overrides. That simple shift becomes powerful. Your presence becomes proof that healthy interaction exists. Your calm attention becomes a safe mirror where they can see their thoughts clearly again. You don't push them to be bold. You make it safe for them to be honest. And honesty is where courage quietly rebuilds itself step by step, sentence by sentence, decision by decision. Courage often returns not through pressure, but through permission. Control depends on isolation, secrecy, fear, and unspoken rules. It grows strongest where questions are discouraged, where disagreement is punished, where emotional expression is labeled as weakness or rebellion. In such environments, silence becomes a survival strategy. The controlled person learns to stay quiet, agree quickly, and avoid emotional risk. Silence becomes their shield, but also their cage. Safe connection breaks that cage when someone offers a non-judgmental space where thoughts can be spoken without backlash. Truth begins to surface naturally, not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. First comes small admissions, small doubts, small stories. Then come realizations. Then comes clarity. Connection does not need to be dramatic to be transformative. A respectful conversation, a validating response, a calm disagreement, these moments send a powerful message. You are allowed to think. You are allowed to feel. You are allowed to question. Truth grows where fear is not fed. And once truth grows, control loses its strongest weapon, unquestioned authority. Trying to rescue someone aggressively often recreates the same pattern of control you are trying to break, telling them what to do, who to leave, how to act, and when to change, even with good intentions, can replace one pressure with another. Real empowerment is not forceful, not loud, not dominating. It is invitational. You help people see patterns instead of commanding decisions. You ask questions instead of issuing instructions. You offer perspective instead of ultimatums. This approach restores ownership. When a person reaches their own conclusion, makes their own choice, takes their own step, the change lasts longer and stands stronger. Personal power is not given, it is recognized. Your role is not to carry them out of their situation, but to hold a light so they can see the door themselves. When they walk through it by their own will, their confidence grows, their independence strengthens, and their identity stabilizes. That is not rescue, that is awakening. Never underestimate the long-term impact of one genuine, respectful, emotionally safe relationship. A single healthy bond can reset someone's standards, expectations, and self-worth. When a person experiences mutual respect, honest communication, emotional safety, and personal space, often for the first time, their internal definition of normal changes. They begin to notice what feels wrong elsewhere. They begin to question what they once tolerated. They begin to expect dignity, not dominance, dialogue, not directives, partnership, not possession. One authentic relationship becomes a reference point, a new measuring scale for all future relationships. This is how futures change quietly, not through grand interventions, not through public moments, but through consistent authenticity, steady respect, and reliable emotional safety. One real connection can interrupt years of unhealthy conditioning and plant a new belief. I deserve better. I can choose better. I will not settle again. But change does not always arrive with noise, confrontation, and dramatic exits. Often it arrives through awareness, respect, and a single meaningful connection. When someone has lived too long under control, they don't just lose freedom. They lose trust in their own voice, their own judgment, and their own worth. What restores them is not pressure, not commands, not rescue missions, but steady presence, safe conversation, and honest respect. You may never fully see the impact you have had on someone's life. You may never hear the full story of how your listening, your fairness, your simple validation helped them question what they once accepted as normal. But impact does not require recognition to be real. Seeds grow even when the gardener is not watching. Remember this: when you create space for truth, courage begins to breathe. When you offer respect, confidence begins to stand. When you model healthy connection, new standards begin to form. A person who was ready to settle can rediscover choice. A person who was shrinking can expand. Again, a person who felt owned can remember they are their own. Never underestimate the quiet power of being genuine, being fair, being emotionally safe. One real connection can interrupt control, restore identity, and redirect a future. Sometimes the turning point in someone's life is not a major event. It is simply meeting someone who treats them the way they deserve to be treated.